History books love a simple, clean narrative. When the world looks back at the epic story of Indian independence, the narrative is almost always exactly the same. It is the globally accepted narrative centered around Mahatma Gandhi. We're taught about the unparalleled power of strict nonviolence. We learn about the peaceful protests that slowly but surely dismantled the mighty British Empire. It is an inspiring story of moral victory. But what if I told you it is only half of the truth? Because there was another leader in the shadows, a man who looked at the brutality of colonial rule and fiercely believed that peace simply wasn't enough. While others negotiated with their oppressors, he prepared for absolute war. This is the man who defied the odds and raised an army. Driven by a burning, uncompromising desire to see his country free, he did the unthinkable. He allied with the Axis powers. He didn't just want political reforms, he launched a full-scale military invasion to free his homeland by force. His name was Subhas Chandra Bose. To millions of his followers, he was a hero. To the British Crown, they were their worst nightmare. And just as his extraordinary life was defined by defiance, his final chapter was defined by a haunting ambiguity. He vanished in a fiery crash, leaving behind an enduring mystery of his death in 1945. It is a mystery that still fuels massive conspiracy theories today. But how did a brilliant scholar from a wealthy Bengali family become the British Empire's most wanted man? To understand the legend, we have to go back to the beginning. Long before he became the militant leader of a liberation army, Subhas Chandra Bose was just a boy, born in 1897 in the city of Cuttack. He wasn't born into poverty or desperate struggle. In fact, he had a highly privileged upbringing. Combine that family wealth with his immense intellect, and his future seemed completely laid out for him from day one. In colonial India, a young man of his elite background was expected to get a top-tier education, keep his head down, and live out a comfortable, quiet life under the shadow of the British Crown. But Bose was fundamentally different. Even as a young student, he possessed a fiercely uncompromising nature. If you want an early glimpse into the kind of rebel he was destined to become, look no further than his time as a student at Presidency College. At the college, there was a British professor named Oaten. Professor Oaten was notoriously racist towards his Indian students. For most people living under colonial rule, challenging a British superior was entirely unthinkable. You just had to take the abuse. But Bose wasn't most people. In what became his first true rebellion, he was completely expelled from Presidency College for allegedly assaulting this racist British professor. It was a massive scandal, but it was the first clear sign that Bose would never quietly accept the humiliation of his people. Despite the expulsion, his family was determined to see him succeed in the system. He was sent on a long journey to England. His singular goal? To take the incredibly difficult and highly prestigious Indian Civil Service exam, commonly known as the ICS. You have to understand that back then, passing the ICS was the ultimate golden ticket. It meant a life of immense power, luxury, and status working as an elite administrator. And Bose, with his brilliant mind, he didn't just barely pass the exam, he placed fourth overall. It was an absolutely massive achievement. The British Empire had effectively just handed him the keys to an incredibly lucrative career. His family was thrilled. His future was completely secure. All he had to do was sign on the dotted line. Instead, he delivered the ultimate rejection. To the absolute shock of everyone around him, he abruptly resigns. People thought he was crazy. Why throw away the opportunity of a lifetime? But Bose's reasoning was crystal clear. When explaining his shocking decision, he stated plainly that he absolutely refused to work for the alien bureaucracy that was actively oppressing his people. He realized that no matter how high he rose in the ranks, joining the ICS meant serving the very machine that was bleeding India dry. And just like that, the scholar turned his back on a life of guaranteed luxury. Bose returned to India not as a bureaucrat, but as a revolutionary. However, he was about to collide with the most powerful figure in Indian politics, a man whose methods were the exact opposite of his own. Stepping away from the British administration, Subhas Chandra Bose threw himself entirely into the heart of the freedom struggle. He quickly became a massive rising star within the Indian National Congress, or the INC, rapidly ascending the political ladder alongside Jawaharlal Nehru. With his fiery speeches and radical energy, Bose was electrifying. To the younger generation, he wasn't just a politician. He quickly became the absolute idol of the Indian youth. But this soaring popularity was setting him on a direct collision course with the most revered man in the country, Mahatma Gandhi. What happened next was a fascinating, high-stakes ideological clash. You see, Gandhi and Bose had the exact same ultimate goal: a free India, but their roadmaps to get there couldn't have been more fundamentally opposed. On one side, you had Gandhi. His entire philosophy was built on the foundation of ahimsa, or strict nonviolence. Gandhi believed in playing the long game. He advocated for incremental change, believing that India should first negotiate for dominion status within the British Empire before pushing further. To Gandhi, the method of achieving freedom was just as important as the freedom itself. On the other side, you had Bose. He had absolutely zero patience for incremental change or polite negotiations. Bose demanded Purna Swaraj, complete and immediate independence. He was deeply inspired by the international socialist and nationalist movements that were reshaping the globe. And crucially, unlike Gandhi, Bose was entirely willing to use armed struggle to violently tear the British out of India. This wasn't just a minor disagreement, it was a battle for the very soul of the independence movement. And in 1939, this boiling rivalry finally reached its spectacular climax during what is now known as the Tripuri Crisis. That year, Bose boldly decided to run for the presidency of the Indian National Congress. Gandhi, seeing Bose's militant radicalism as a direct threat to his nonviolent movement, actively opposed him. To stop Bose, Gandhi threw his massive political weight behind his own hand-picked, chosen candidate, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah. It was a proxy war. The entire nation watched with bated breath. The establishment backed Gandhi, but the youth and the radical factions backed Bose. When the votes were finally tallied, the result sent absolute shockwaves through the empire. Bose won. He had successfully defied the Mahatma. But in politics, winning the vote doesn't always mean winning the war. Gandhi was deeply stung by the result, famously and publicly declaring that Sitaramaia's defeat was actually his own defeat. This statement was a political death sentence for Bose's presidency. Out of sheer loyalty to Gandhi, the INC High Command completely froze Bose out. They refused to cooperate with him, refused to serve on his committee, and deliberately paralyzed his ability to lead. The pressure was immense, ultimately forcing his resignation from the presidency. Ousted from the party he helped build, Bose realized he could never free India from within the confines of British law or Gandhi's shadow. The world was on the brink of World War II, and Bose saw an unprecedented opportunity. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. When World War II finally breaks out, the globe is thrown into absolute chaos. While many leaders in the Indian National Congress debated their next political moves, Subhas Chandra Bose saw a once-in-a-lifetime geopolitical opening. The British Empire was suddenly fighting for its very survival in Europe. Their forces were stretched thin, their resources were draining, and their attention was divided. To Bose, this was the perfect moment to strike. But the British were completely terrified of Bose's massive influence over the Indian public. They knew exactly how dangerous his militant rhetoric was during a time of global war. To neutralize the threat, they swiftly moved in and placed him under strict house arrest in his family home in Calcutta. British intelligence stationed heavily armed guards and undercover agents all around the perimeter. He was watched day and night. The British government thought they had successfully caged the tiger. They were dead wrong. What happens next in 1941 is a thrilling spy movie-level narrative that sounds almost too wild to be true. Bose knew he couldn't lead a revolution from a locked room. He needed to get out of India, and he needed a flawless disguise. He let his beard grow out rugged and long. He completely shed his usual Bengali attire and dressed himself in traditional Pathan clothing. When he finally looked in the mirror, Subhas Chandra Bose was gone. In his place stood Ziauddin, a traveling Pashtun insurance agent. But Bose had a very distinct, highly recognizable voice and accent. If he spoke, he would be instantly compromised. His solution? He decided to play the role of a man who was entirely deaf and mute. In the dead of night, in January 1941, disguised as this deaf and mute insurance agent named Ziauddin, Bose completely slips past the heavily armed British intelligence officers guarding his home. It was a masterclass in deception. But escaping his house was only step one. Bose then embarked on a perilous, back-breaking journey. He traveled by train to the northwest frontier, dodging police checkpoints and British informants at every single turn. From there, he faced the brutal, snowy mountains of Afghanistan. Traveling on foot and by mule through the freezing, treacherous terrain, he crossed the border and smuggled himself into Kabul. For weeks, he hid in safe houses in Afghanistan, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with British and Soviet spies, desperately trying to make contact with Axis embassies. Finally, he secured passage. His incredible escape route took him up into the Soviet Union and eventually all the way into the belly of the beast, Nazi Germany. Now, we have to pause and address the elephant in the room objectively. This is the controversial alliance that makes Bose's legacy so incredibly complicated today. Driven by the sheer desperation to free India, Bose strictly followed the ancient proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." In Berlin, Bose actually meets with Adolf Hitler. He wastes no time leveraging this new Axis alliance to build an army. He officially forms the Free India Legion. But where did he get his troops in the middle of Europe? He recruited them directly from the thousands of Indian prisoners of war, or POWs, who had been captured by the famous German general Erwin Rommel during the fierce tank battles in North Africa. Bose visited the POW camps himself, passionately convincing these captured soldiers to switch sides, pick up German weapons, and prepare to march on British India. But as the months dragged on, a bitter disillusionment began to set in. Bose was a fiercely proud Indian nationalist. Hitler was a white supremacist megalomaniac. Bose quickly realized why he needed to leave Europe. Hitler was deeply racist and proved to be entirely uninterested in India's true freedom. To Hitler, the Indian Legion was just a propaganda tool. Furthermore, Hitler made the colossal strategic blunder of invading the Soviet Union, meaning the Nazi war machine was entirely focused on invading Russia. The dream of a German-backed land invasion of British India evaporated. Bose realizes that Germany is an absolute dead end. He was trapped in Berlin, far from home, allied with a dictator who cared nothing for his cause. He needed an ally closer to home. And so, in 1943, he embarked on one of the most dangerous journeys of the entire war that would literally take him to the other side of the world. Trapped in a freezing, war-torn Europe, Subhas Chandra Bose realized his German alliance had completely stalled out. If he was going to raise an army to liberate India, he needed to be closer to home. He needed to reach Southeast Asia. But in 1943, the oceans were an absolute death trap, heavily patrolled by Allied warships and bombers. Flying was completely out of the question. So, how do you secretly transport the British Empire's most wanted man across the globe at the height of the most destructive war in human history? You go underneath the surface. What follows is a harrowing, claustrophobic 90-day journey that remains one of the most incredible, unsung stories of the Second World War. Bose boards a German U-boat, specifically the U-180, and begins a terrifying voyage across enemy-controlled waters. For weeks on end, he lived in the sweltering, oil-stained, completely submerged tin can of the U-boat, constantly dodging Allied depth charges. But the most dangerous part of this journey wasn't the British Navy, it was the rendezvous point. Off the coast of Madagascar, right in the middle of treacherous, highly turbulent, and shark-infested waters, the German U-boat surfaces to meet a Japanese submarine, the I-29. In heavy, violent ocean swells, Bose and his aide have to climb into a tiny rubber raft and paddle between the two massive steel submarines. To put into perspective just how unprecedented and insane this maneuver was, this event remains the only civilian transfer between two submarines across the entirety of World War II. Bose successfully arrives in Japan, where his fierce charisma immediately wins over the Japanese leadership, gaining the crucial official support of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. With Japanese backing secured, Bose travels to Singapore to take over the reins of a fractured, struggling militia known as the Indian National Army, or the INA. Before Bose arrived, the INA was largely a demoralized group of former Indian prisoners of war who had surrendered to the Japanese. They lacked direction, they lacked supplies, and they lacked fire. But the moment Subhas Chandra Bose, now universally addressed as Netaji or respected leader, stepped up to the podium in Singapore, everything changed. Through the sheer power of his rhetoric and absolute unwavering belief in a free India, Netaji completely transforms this broken, demoralized POW group into a massive, fervent liberation force. He didn't just build an army, he built an entirely parallel state. He spearheaded the official establishment of the Provisional Government of Free India. He was printing currency, issuing stamps, and establishing a legitimate government in exile that declared war on Britain and the United States. And perhaps most remarkably for the 1940s, Bose was radically progressive. He believed true freedom required the absolute equality of men and women. He established the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, completely shattering the norms of the time. This wasn't a nursing corps. This was one of the world's first all-female combat regiments, made up of fiercely dedicated women trained to fire rifles, throw grenades, and fight on the front lines. Standing before this newly massive, highly motivated army, Bose delivered what would become the most famous, spine-chilling war cry in Indian history. "Give me blood, and I shall give you freedom." And they gave him their blood. In 1944, the INA, fighting shoulder to shoulder alongside the Japanese Imperial Army, finally crossed the border to launch a full-scale invasion of British India. This was the Imphal campaign. For a brief shining moment, the dream was intensely real. The INA actually pushed the British forces back and managed to triumphantly plant the Indian tricolor flag on Indian soil at Moirang. But war is brutally unforgiving. The tide of World War II was turning, and the Axis powers were collapsing. But even in defeat, Bose was about to strike a fatal blow to the British Empire. He just wouldn't live to see it. By August 1945, the devastating atomic bombs had fallen, and the Empire of Japan officially surrendered. The Axis alliance was completely shattered, but Bose still refused to give up the fight. Ever the relentless strategist, on August 18, 1945, he boarded a Japanese bomber bound for Manchuria. His likely goal? To pivot entirely and forge a brand new alliance with the Soviets to keep the dream of a free India alive. But he would never make it. The bomber tragically crashed in Taiwan. According to the official historical record, Subhas Chandra Bose reportedly died in a local military hospital from severe third-degree burns sustained in the fiery wreckage. Yet, for millions of Indians, the story simply didn't end there. The sheer lack of a publicly recovered body gave birth to one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. It is a mystery that still heavily fuels conspiracy theories today. In fact, for decades, the Indian government actually refused to officially accept his death. Rumors swept across the nation, most notably the legend of Gumnami Baba, a mysterious, unnamed ascetic living in northern India who many fiercely believed was Netaji living out his days in secret exile. While we must keep it factual, most historians agree he perished in the crash. It is easy to acknowledge why the myth of his survival still heavily captivates the public imagination. They simply couldn't believe their greatest warrior was gone. But as it turned out, Netaji didn't need to be alive to deal a massive, fatal blow to the British Empire. Following the end of the war, the British government made what would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Between 1945 and 1946, they decided to make a very public, brutal example of the captured INA soldiers by staging the highly publicized Red Fort trials in Delhi. They deliberately put 3 prominent INA officers on trial for high treason. Symbolically, these 3 men represented the absolute diversity of the Indian subcontinent. One was Hindu, one was Muslim, and one was Sikh. The British intended for these trials to be a harsh warning meant to strike immense fear into the hearts of the populace. Instead, it provided the ultimate spark. The trials spectacularly backfired, instantly igniting the Indian public. Instead of dividing the masses, the entire country unified in unprecedented roaring outrage. These men weren't viewed as traitors to the crown. They were universally hailed as absolute patriots. This fierce outrage quickly boiled over into sheer, undeniable military rebellion. In 1946, directly inspired by the legacy of Bose's INA, Indian sailors officially initiated the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny. They took over ships and mutinied against their British commanders. This was the exact moment the British truly panicked. The British suddenly realized they could no longer trust the very foundation of their colonial power, the Indian armed forces. Without the absolute loyalty of the military to keep India subjugated, the empire's days were officially numbered. Gandhi's peaceful protests laid the moral groundwork, but it was the ghost of Subhas Chandra Bose and his army that finally broke the sword of the British Empire. When we assess the legacy of Subhas Chandra Bose today, his impact on history is absolutely undeniable. Years later, even the former British Prime Minister Clement Attlee openly admitted that the INA and the resulting naval mutinies were major driving factors in Britain's hasty, forced exit from India in 1947. Subhas Chandra Bose was, without a doubt, a profoundly complex figure. He was a fiercely dedicated patriot who made deeply controversial alliances in a desperate, uncompromising bid for his country's freedom. Today, he remains the ultimate symbol of militant nationalism in India, a man who sacrificed everything to see his homeland free. Subhas Chandra Bose's legacy is incredibly complex. Do you think his alliance with the Axis powers was justified by his ultimate goal of Indian independence? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most dramatic untold stories, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical deep dives, and click the bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.